First of all, I loved visiting Ukraine. I will go back as soon as I can to visit, to walk in the streets, to stand in Maidan Square again under that beautiful banner that said, "Freedom is our religion." I'm planning to be back there, and I will bring friends and I will bring colleagues. Um, as Katerina said, I spent a number of years on the executive team of Wikipedia. And Wikipedia radicalized me about free knowledge, that information and access to information is necessary for social change. It's not all of that's necessary, but it is a minimum requisite. And it's part of what makes me so angry about what is happening now in Russia and with other oppressive regimes, because their citizens are not allowed by their governments to see what's going on. The Wikipedians in Russia who have stood up in solidarity and truth-telling are being jailed. My business is that I work with large organizations. I have clients like Nike and Google and Facebook and a lot of technology companies. And the other half of my business is with pro-democracy activists in all parts of the world. So whether it was working with people in Hong Kong against China, I've supported Iranian feminists. I've worked with pro-democracy activists in South America. And so I have watched the tactics of oppressive regimes like Russia, like China, like Argentina, like Turkey. Because what oppressive regimes fundamentally do is that they make a ceiling on human development. And as a psychologist, that's what makes me so angry about oppressive regimes, is they want obedience and they want money and they want power. They do not want the development and self-determination of its citizenry. And so the fight that Ukraine is the spear of right now, it's the spear tip of a much broader fight. My friend Molly McHugh said for years, Ukraine has been the shield against Putin, and now it is the tip of the spear. And as you know, being the tip of a spear is not a safe, you know that more than anyone else, it is not a safe thing to be. Okay. Ukraine, one of the deep ironies of the moment is that this was presumably instigated because Ukraine was moving towards the West and Putin was afraid of that. And so that was his excuse, one of his many excuses to wage an unjust war. But the reality right now is that Ukraine is actually defining the West, which I think is really interesting. You know, Ukraine has made NATO relevant again. Ukraine is impacting the elections of the West. Putin has been instigating Russia-friendly parties within the West, whether it's Marie Le Pen in France, or the obvious one to me, of course, is American, is Trump, right? Or you've got Orban in Hungary, these Putin apologists that live in the West. The idea of democracy has actually been eroding in the West because of apathy, because people have gotten too comfortable, because Putin has actually been very effective in his whataboutisms, you know. The situation in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, the unjust war in Ukraine is changing what's possible in the West and is actually asking Europe, America, any people who say they have freedom-loving values to stand up in a different way. Somebody mentioned the brand of Ukraine earlier in the article that you mentioned, Katerina. And brand is a funny word because Ukrainians are so much more than a brand. You know, you have so much more. At the same time, as Katerina was referencing earlier, the way that you are able to act with moral clarity and moral imagination gives you a platform that no one else has. Certainly not America. America, I still believe in the American experiment, but it's a challenging one. Our actions in Afghanistan and Iraq do not give us moral clarity that Ukraine has at this moment in time. So not only have you been brave and decisive and clear, but you have made an enemy that seemed invincible look ridiculous. And that's a wonderful thing, because what humor does, what the memes have done, is that it has eroded the fear that paralyzes people, the fear of Putin that has paralyzed people and made people in the West put him on a pedestal that he doesn't deserve. The Russian warships, go fuck yourself, is iconic. That will be remembered for great reasons, not just because it was funny, but because it was brave. So I think that the Ukrainians people have a chance to craft a different future, not just for Ukraine, but for the West. To be able to help the West come back to a sense of principles about self-determination, about bravery, about a future where people have a say in their governments, where people have a right to publicly protest, to tell the truth and not just engage in propaganda warfare, to organize, and to stand up for something that the West says it believes in, but that hasn't really been able to be clear on. So this clarity is really a beautiful and interesting thing. Ukraine is giving the West something to rally around, something to stand for. And specifically, I think that Ukraine can rebuild. I love that idea of this group as Phoenix in a way that is better than what came before. I think a lot of Europe is still enmeshed in its past, in its World War II, and its post-World War II identities, right? But what Ukraine is looking towards in the future can help the entire world look towards a future that is more possible, that is bigger, that is braver, that is more thoughtful, that is more intergenerational, that is more holistic in the way that you think about what it means to be human, what it means to live a good life, what it means to have an educated and thoughtful youth, what it means to be skilled in what you're doing. Like, Ukraine is incredibly skilled right now. I think it's really showing the world that it's not just about might. And you're doing it in the face of incredible violence. To show the world that might is not the only thing that matters in the face of such violence to your people, it's such an incredible thing. It brings me to tears to think about it. I think that that's why the whole world is riveted to it. So you have to keep that moral high ground and moral imagination, the imagination of the Ukrainian people, based on the incredibly rich history, based on the role that Ukraine has played as the breadbasket of Europe and the intersection that Ukraine has been for Europe for more centuries than I'm familiar with. Building on top of that and yet looking towards a future is just such a gift, again, in the face of this incredible violence that Ukraine is giving the world. I just want to pause there and see if you have any thoughts or responses or questions from that.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Gayle. This is such an inspiring image and vision for us. It's very important to hear these words of acknowledgement in a way. And we are very much willing to contribute to the world And I believe maybe this is the first time in history that the voice of Ukrainians is heard so powerfully. And we mourn that at the same time it cost so many lives. But we want to hope that it's not happening in vain. And I'd like to also invite you to share a little. You've been working with women for very long on various managerial programs. You've been supporting women in different countries. Why so? And what is the role of women, in your opinion, in this particular situation of war? While men are fighting, actually, they're determining the future of the country. And we are sitting, scattered around Europe, and sometimes feeling like we are useless and helpless. So what would you recommend, and what would you say about the role of women in these circumstances?
I'm going to reference another model, which is overly simplified. But you can imagine for a moment that you can simplify the world into fixers and builders, right? And you need both. You need the people who will address the current situation as it is, but you need the people who will come in with a long-term perspective, who are outside, who can build a broader net. And I think that the women of the Ukrainian diaspora, who are all over the world, who are having access to different markets, different skills, different perspectives, which is exactly why you've created this, are going to build a different infrastructure. You are going to pay attention to different things. You're going to pay, and women do this naturally. Women pay attention intergenerationally. You think about your parents, you think about your children. This intergenerational, multi-dimensional component is what you offer. You're not going to take down the aircraft with a rocket launcher, which is very needed. Like, close the fucking airspace. I keep writing my government about that. But you will be able to think about the long term. How do you take advantage, as you said, of a particular moment? How do you make sure those lives are not in vain? How do you shape a narrative of a country? How do you become a localized presence that isn't a victim, or isn't just the recipient of charities, but actually a contributing force, so that the brand stays strong? Again, not my favorite word, brand, but that it stays strong in the broader network, so that people know what it means to be Ukrainian. And so that identity can be such a source of strength when you are rebuilding your country. So I think for the builders, which I see women doing, it takes being able to take a wider perspective. It takes being able to think not just about what your children need, but what your children's children will need. It takes the presence of women to be able to also address trauma, because that is going to exist in your system, and to transform not just post-traumatic stress and trauma, to transform it into post-traumatic growth. That it can be the thing that transforms into something bigger, to be a force of understanding and compassion, but also moral clarity. You as women get to hold both of these things and braid those strands together in a way that, frankly, the men in Ukraine at the moment, men and women in Ukraine at the moment, don't have capacity for. They are doing what they need to do to respond in the moment. But I believe this is why we need systems, is because we need excess capacity. That's where flow happens. If you've got a traffic jam, there's no capacity in that system. There's no room for movement. All of you who've been stuck in traffic know what that looks like. You need places where there's movement and flex to see possibility sets. You will be able to see possibilities if you can breathe, if you can address your own trauma, if you can find community and find solace and camaraderie and friendship, not just amongst yourselves, but with the people in the communities that you find yourselves in and the different countries you find yourselves in. And from that place, you will see possibilities that aren't available just if you're in survival mode. And Ukraine is in survival mode right now, absolutely. But it's doing it from a place, if you can maintain, again, that moral clarity, you can build so much more. And to do it with love. You know, I think that's a thing that to really remember in this time, that love of your country, love of each other, love of the children, love of those who have gone, love of those who have sacrificed. I mean, that's what's standing out so clearly. And I didn't say this earlier, but I mean, it's no accident that that's the message that is deeply human. Like the images that are staying in people's mind of people bringing their children, their parents, their pets out of Ukraine, and they're returning back to Ukraine because they love Ukraine. Like that creates possibilities for all of us, because it says, oh, we too can aspire to this.
Я хотіла б ще звернутися до Гейл з останнім питанням. Гейл є одним з тих людей з Західного світу, яка публічно, зрозуміло, відверто, на всіх рівнях каже «Close the damn sky». Це сміливо, це мужньо, це чесно, і це, на жаль, превеликий, відрізняється від позицій дуже багатьох людей в Західному світі. І, Гейл, я б хотіла попросити тебе пояснити це. Пояснити це нам, можливо, пояснити своїми словами людям, твоїм співвітчизникам. Чому ти притримуєшся саме такої позиції? Чому ти підтримуєш Україну на рівні екзистенційному? Чому ти вважаєш, що є сенс ризикувати для Західного світу, ідучи на такі серйозні кроки? Поясни, будь ласка, як ти це бачиш?
What dictators do, and Putin is such an asshole. Part of what dictators do is they deliberately cultivate fear and apathy. So they cultivate fear so people don't act, and they cultivate apathy by overwhelming with information. Oh, there's propaganda on both sides, which is clearly bullshit. I start swearing more when I talk about dictators. The West is caught in its own fear. And I understand that. World War III is scary. Nuclear is scary. But the cost of stopping a dictator only goes up over time, right? It's a curve that goes upward. It would have been better, actually less expensive, to possibly stop Putin in Crimea, right? The cost is just going to go up over time. So there's a very practical reason for it, in my mind. The other thing is that Ukraine is teaching us what it means to be able to act anyway, right? This is what human beings have to learn. You know, we love anyway, even though we'll get our heart broken, right? We have to act anyway. The poem Katerina said earlier, I think I caught something of a line that of what it means to be beyond fear. You're in it, right? So I think that that's part of what Ukraine has to teach the West, to act anyway, because it's the right thing to do and not be caught up so much by fear and so much by complexity. Well, what about? Well, we didn't do it in Afghanistan. You're right. We didn't do it in Afghanistan. We were shitty in Iraq. That doesn't mean don't act now, you know? And I think that Ukraine can lend us clarity. I think that's why this is important.
Thank you. Thank you, Gayle. Beautiful. Gayle, just to let you know, this is extremely supportive. What you're saying is very, very supportive. And it gives hope that there are people in the West who grasp this clarity, who grasp this importance, this urgency to act. And thank you for this beautiful phrase that you mentioned, that keeping the dictators is expensive. Yeah, and the longer it's happening, the more expensive it is. Yeah, thank you.